You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. I'm Mark Newbold, and welcome to a very special episode where I had the great opportunity to sit down with Anthony Daniels to discuss the Propstore Entertainment Memorabilia live auction, which includes the Anthony Daniels collection. It takes place on the 9th and 10th of November. The articles in it are absolutely incredible, and I had the opportunity to talk to Anthony about those items. So here's myself and Anthony Daniels discussing the Propstore auction and a few other things besides.
For years, I've been aware that I've got stuff in drawers and cupboards and attics and whatever across continents. And I'd always planned that, assumed that after I'm gone, somebody else, probably my wife Christine, would be in charge of moving it on, selling it, whatever, as part of my estate. And then I mentioned it. She said, well, it's much better to do it now whilst you're here, because I don't want to have the bother, you know. So then I didn't know how to go about, it was such a big thing. I couldn't imagine how to begin to. I thought of eBay, and I have never managed to do anything on eBay. And then I really didn't know how to progress it. And then I was introduced, talking to a friend of mine, Jonathan Sands, who's a very big Star Wars fan. He said, well, there's this company called Propstore. And I think the first thing was they sent me one of their previous, what do you call them? Catalogue, which is behind you. And I was absolutely in awe of it. I have kept it, even though it's nothing to do with me. Such a beautiful document. And then we had a meeting, and eventually I would go to their place out in the country, and was astounded at the movie material they have, movie props and television and stuff. Totally professional, totally correct about everything. And so I've been really happy to work with them. And, at one point, the room next to where we are was just surrounded by stuff which I'd collected from all different areas. And they came and they documented on computer, as I explained what everything was, and they sort of put things away carefully. They're like museum, curators. Yeah. And then they did take things away, study them, screen-matched stuff where it was appropriate, and mounted bits of stuff in the most beautiful way. For instance, one of the sets of objects is some of the original fingers that I wore in 1976 in the desert, and throughout the shoot, actually, which were terribly clunky bits of, I think it's aluminium, but they're so heavy, you'd think maybe they're steel, I don't know, handcrafted joints of fingers, most of which are missing, but they were completely useless. You could not pick up anything with them. They just looked nice. Yeah. And I had to really force my hands apart to keep them on. Otherwise they just flopped off, They were glued onto a black cotton glove the night before, because we know I wrote a book, I am C-3PO, and the night we arrived on the location hotel, Maxie sat on my bed next to me, I put the glove on, he glued these things on. And of course, and it was kind of midnight. Yeah. We were starting at 4 or 5 in the morning. But of course the glue went through on my hands and and it was a kind of telltale of how the shoot would be, which was a nightmare. Yeah. So the gloves were the last thing to be made, because although we got 6 months to make the whole costume, it wasn't long enough.
No.
And we didn't have a tryout. We'd had no rehearsals. I just made it up, really. So that's one of the sets of objects there that people say, are you sorry to see things go? They've never been properly displayed. The only thing which you will still see here is the Lego, which is not in the auction, the big Lego figure, which I adore. And already somebody has claimed that after my death, so that's going to a good home. My death not being imminent, we hope. So these things have never been particularly demonstrated or honoured or respected. I've looked after them. The 3PO head, of course, I've used occasionally in publicity shots and so on, because it's a good aid memoir. Who's the old guy? He's the one with his head in this gold thing. Yeah, so there we are. So one of the other reasons for doing this is Christine and I have had experiences fairly recently of visiting major collectors who have whole rooms given over to displaying and adoring and honouring objects. And it didn't feel right that the stuff I had was in cardboard boxes and whatever, and I would forget. And indeed, in putting it all together, I found things I'd totally forgotten I had, which was quite fun. One of the sad things, of course, is all the stuff that I either threw away or gave away. I used to have a lot of toys from Kenner and so on, and I've nowhere to put them. Don't have the sort of size of home that I can store stuff. So I'd give them to kids visiting or local hospital. I used to go around and say, do what you want with this. Gosh, if I'd kept them now, But it's all, Many of the objects, of course, have actually worn. I think everything's been dry cleaned and whatever, so you are safe. And other objects I picked up on the way, as you do. A film set is full of stuff that gets, I remember in the desert, things used to actually blow away bits of the original feet were my deck shoes, a bit like this, with gold or silver cups over sort of just a lid on top. And they were made of very cheap plastic, you cut with scissors. And regularly bits would blow off in the wind, nobody was going to chase them. So they've gradually added to the DNA of the deserts we've filmed in. And there's other things you just pick up for fun as a souvenir, But I've never been a collector of anything. And in fact, on the Rise of Skywalker, I was really admiring a sculpture in Babu Frick's den. It was lovely, sort of Greek type, very plain. And I remember JJ saying, well, will you take it? And I went, and I thought, no, it's just stuff. I don't want stuff. I mean, you look around the room we're in, it's pretty sparse. And that's from choice. Don't want clutter.
This is Charles Soule. You're listening to Fantha Tracks.
When you decided to do this, did you take apart from the Lego C3PO, did you take an all or nothing approach? Did you think
totally.
It all goes or none of it goes?
Yes, all or nothing. The only nothing haven't included was anything that had anybody's personal details, address, phone numbers, all that kind of thing. I was very careful to police, if you will, because I don't want anybody to be upset. And there is still plenty there. I mean, the call sheets and so on may have a hotel address that's no longer relevant or anything like that, but they do. And the call sheets are actually kind of fun. They're just Ronioed bits of paper, but they tell you the history of that day, the pickup time. Maybe 5:30 in the morning. The shots, the location scenes and so on. And certainly, I would stop whilst I was finding all the stuff and sit on the floor and just kind of go, oh, yeah, I remember that.
I was going to say, did it bring a lot of stuff back when
totally.
You were going through your own
Yeah. Stuff? And one of the things that especially did that was various bits of paper that were the cue sheets for the ADR sessions, or back in the day looping sessions, and many people will know that when we made Star Wars in 1976, the way you put your voice on the film, because all my voice had to be replaced because of the sound very good. So there you would have a piece of celluloid made, and there were 3 magnetic stripes on it, and it went round in a circle with the picture, and therefore you had 3 goes at getting it right before you had to wipe one off and whatever. And then the next loop would be fed up in the machine and so on. So I've got looping scripts and also ADR scripts, because then looping became automatic dialogue replacement, where everything's on the computer, shoot, do it as many times as you like. Nobody ever called me One Take Daniel, so...
When you were collating your things and took them to Propstore, knowing that Stephen Lane and the team are so intense and serious and everything's about provenance and all of that element, did you know yourself, were you appreciative yourself of the place in movie history that some of these items had? Or did that kind of come to you after you sort of did it?
No, I've always been aware of the place that Star Wars has in the world's entertainment archive, memory, consciousness. And it's all... I've never been a part of it myself, because I'm a part of the film, and that kind of takes away some of the magic. But I've been very aware, and very aware of the responsibility to kind of, as a person, to keep it all going, to be a good example of somebody from a thing that other person has loved so much, and want to maintain that love for. Nobody asked me to be like that. It's just I feel responsible.
You've been an ambassador for Star Wars for a long time. That's kind of what you're describing, isn't it, really?
I suppose so. I don't want to destroy... I mean, people say, never meet your heroes or whatever. I'm certainly not perfect all the time, and there are times when, if you're doing a big event with a lot of stuff going on, and it's the 100th view, or literally at a premiere, you are on the edge of snapping. It's I play an automaton. I am not one, but one of the things I like about the collection of stuff is, I suppose, each object in some way honours what went on to get that stuff on the screen, whether it is part of the production or... I mean, one of the things that amused me to do many years ago after the prequels was to take some of the blue screen carpet, because not just the walls that are blue, there's acres of blue carpeting there, and again most of everything gets thrown away, and it took me a while. But in this case, I got some pieces of carpet made up into sections and numbered them, because they don't exist anywhere else, but they are a bit of the true floor of whichever scenes that was in the prequels. And so, that was very much a part, and they actually have granules of sand in, because they were in desert scenes where the blue melded into a sand base. I think probably... No, I can't remember which films, so may say on them. But again, it's to share a little bit of fun and whatever. And of course, the provenance of everything through Propstore and through me is everything I have touched here. Funny thing to say, but yeah, I've looked at it. It's belonged to me over the 40 years, some of it. And the provenance is there because one of the issues on, I'm famous on my website for having lots of forgeries of signature, and they still continue to this day, because there's gullible people out who yearn to have something from such a big event as Star Wars, and so they're suckered in, and there are really unpleasant people who are willing to feed that. So everything that's in the catalogue, I've signed a lot of it just to give it that extra bit of a twist, And some of the objects are very high-end, this famous helmet with all its dents and things from falling off the cliff. to, you know, a bunch of trading cards that people, you know, they're called trading cards because people love to swap and all that kind of thing. And so there is something, you know, low price, something way beyond my price. So.
When you were going through everything, obviously in your head, you know, there's, as you said, the big ticket things like the head, or famously the sellotape holder, the things that people always think of. Was there anything when, as you said, you were going through everything and sort of remembering stuff as you went through it, was there ever anything you came across, apart from the stuff that you said you put to one side because of personal details and such, was there anything you went, I kind of wish I'd kept that, but I'm sticking with this.
No, I had made a decision, as you said, all or nothing. And it's not moving on, but it's time for me to say, well, I have, in a certain way, enjoyed these objects. Now they deserve to be enjoyed by a wider group of people who didn't have the luck or experience of being in the movies, but who have subscribed in a different way by being avid followers, members, fans, whatever you want to call them, that they're nice if they have something on which to latch. You know, going back to people have always... I've never had a collecting gene at all. And yet, as I said, you know, we've been to homes with rooms bigger than this. We were just one in Idaho. A staggering amount of very serious collectors. So that's nice. So there were things that maybe disturbed me, you know, because not all the memories are great. Certainly, you know, looking at the inside of the helmet, for instance, it is describable what it's like to be in there, but most people wouldn't want to do it. And, well, I've done it, so there we are. But, you know, is there any way I would dress up for fun? No. I go to, you know, maybe a convention where somebody has made a 3PO costume and they are wearing it, torturing themselves, but getting a lot of lovely attention. But they can only do it for, you know, 20 minutes. And then I spent years of my life in that thing.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds. Bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
There were, you know, some sad memories. I remember finding the bits from the Academy Awards in 1978, I think. The program and you know, that I was a part of it, and pictures of me with 3PO, with Ben Burt and Mark Hamill, not just Luke Skywalker. And it was a very odd evening, and I didn't have a really comfortable experience, you know, because I think I may say in the book that I was nearly arrested because the guard at the back door of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion did not believe who I said, and I had no idea it was in my dressing room ID. That was a really uncomfortable experience. You know, they got guns, these guys.
Sure.
Yes. And I didn't know much about show business or anything, so that was, and there they are, the memories of that are there. So it was a bunch of mixed things. And then silly things like, for some reason, I really like the Kellogg's C-3PO's collection, because there you have an unopened, shake it and it rattles, scary, box. And then you also have the art box, which is a prop you use in a film shoot. It's not the real thing, because it's so beautiful, it's handmade and very special. And they allowed me to keep that. We shot that in London, actually. And then the memories of doing crazy commercials out in... near Las Vegas, I remember, was one set of commercials where 3PO was trying to give these monsters, rock monsters, or bringing them Kellogg's C-3POs. So that was a fun, and there's pictures of me in the suit, half in the suit, holding boxes and props and whatever, all backstage stuff. And then what I love also is bits from the Muppet Show, where there's my script and you can see me tap dancing on the internet, on the whatever. And that was a delight to work for the first time with Frank Oz. But to meet him there as Miss Piggy was because I was a huge fan, huge. And Jim Henson there with, frog, and that was a joy. So there are lots of peripheral memories that come from it.
Has it been cathartic? Because I've interviewed you a number of times over the years, and I believe every time we've spoke, it's felt like, well, I'm kind of done now, but never say never. And then they drag you back in, so to speak. But has it been cathartic to sort of come to this point and go, well, I'm not letting it go. It's still here with me. I've done this stuff and lived this stuff. But as far as the tactile, physical thing, that moves on and I move on. Is that a good thing? Has that felt good for you?
You put it better than I could put it, because I've been aware of it, but mostly subconsciously, that in a general sense, possessions can hold you down and lock you in a place that you don't necessarily need to be there anymore. And I have such strong, vivid memories, I've obviously forgotten a lot, that I don't need physical objects to remember. If we look in this room, obviously you have photographs because, there's my parents' wedding day in Rangoon in, 1930 something. And next to it, a surprise gift. I did an event few years ago at Lucasfilm, and at the end, they gave me a thing that looks like an Oscar. I think it says 50 or 40 years service to Lucasfilm. And I wasn't going to put it out, and Christine said, no, you deserve to have that there. But it's not something, I don't think about Star Wars every day. I have, I hope, moved on.
Are you prepared? You mentioned you've been to seen people's collections and visited various places around the world. Are you prepared, once the auction is done and it's all finished, to walk into somebody's collection and go, how will you feel when you see something that was yours for 40 years?
Well, I'd feel happy for them. I would feel, it's almost like if you're like selling your home, which I've done over the years, you sort of want to sell it to somebody. If you've loved your home, and I have, you sort of want to pass it on to somebody who's going to like it and respect it and cherish it. And I think that will happen. And I would happily meet somebody who did that,
I'm Brian Herring, BB-8 puppeteer, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. That'll learn you.
After a brief break for a cup of tea and a biscuit, Anthony and myself discussed some of the items in the Propstore auction.
Some of the fun objects are the cotton patches that were actually sewn onto my bodysuit, so that you couldn't see through my elbows or the back of my knees. So they had wires painted for the most part. Certainly originally, eventually in the sequels, prequels, I don't know, equals, they were sometimes wires, but they were a bit annoying because they would tangle up and whatever. So there are these printed patches, very, as I look at them on the catalogue, really quite attractive. And of course I had lots of bodysuits because sometimes I would wear 3 or 4 a day, changing in between shots because I did say things have been dry cleaned. So
I'd never considered that. That's the first time I've ever heard you say that. I guess that makes all the sense. That you're working on a hot set, you're exerting yourself. You feel like you've been scuba diving after half an hour. So
100%, I would feel like I was in a ship from here down.
Yeah.
I could feel dribble. I mean, literally dribbling.
Yeah.
It would end up in my shoes, and I used to feel so disgusting coming out of that suit, and all day. There's Carrie and Mark and Harrison being primped with makeup and looking great and hair. And I would come out, like a newly hatched chick, which was like, and it did not do much for my ego, I tell you. I was amazed in the early film, the first film, to actually have a chair, cross-legged chair with my name on, Anthony Daniels. It felt really like being in a film. I was very excited about that. Of course, I could never use it because I couldn't sit down in that suit. The thought was there. And then there's the holiday special. And what made it special was it was beyond awful. It was so bad. I think I worked on it for 3 days. And I have It's in the catalogue. Very beautiful script. Well, the folder is beautiful, black with silver lettering on it. Looks fantastic. But don't open it. Don't try and read this stuff because it ain't good.
When you did that, just after the success of the original film, blowing all the records out the window and just being the monster hit that it was and still is, and then you move on to something like the Holiday Special, which was of course made with all the best intentions, and Fox or wanted to push it and get something out there for that sort of Thanksgiving '78. When you went into that scenario and kind of clocked fairly quickly, I assume, the level of what this thing was, did that surprise you that I don't know, the quality control is the right word, but did it surprise you that you and the rest of your fellow cast members had moved on into this before you moved on to Empire?
I think it surprised all of us. I remember Harrison being particularly gritted teeth. We all gritted our teeth, except you couldn't see mine because I was inside the costume. But we'd all agreed to do this, and as professionals, once you've said yes, and we all just marvelled at. And I have a memory of this very big soundstage with this hugely ugly prop tree. There was nothing like what we would have in the movies. And then the disaster of all these Wookiees wandering around as if, and I do talk about it, as if they'd been a dose of fentanyl or whatever. It's like a dreadful, dreadful experience. But I was only there for a short time. And of course, everybody sort of has these Museum of Horror exhibits, and that's one of mine. But a lovely thing, which took me quite by surprise, was on one of the sequels, prequels, Attack of the Clones, I think, was the floor marker, because actors are so dim, they always need to be told not only what to say, but where to stand to say it, for the sake of the camera. So on the floor there'll be marks, whether it's a smudge mark or a piece of cotton or whatever. Mostly the camera, if it shows it, you won't notice it. But if it's out of sight, you can have something bigger. And for me, I absolutely needed it because I couldn't see the ground. If I wanted to see where I was going, I had to look down, which is a completely different performance. So often there would be a little bean bag there, canvas bean bag, and I would, what they call tow it. So I would count the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just feel for that. But at one point the crew decided that wasn't kind of grand enough for such a gold person. So they gave me a T marker, which, if you imagine the upright is the centre of the mark, and the outer things are where your feet should be. And it was in gold and black tape. And I love the thoughtfulness and the silly imagination, if you will, of that. A remarkable piece is of the true Death Star. And I mean the Death Star. In Lucas Archives, we were filming at some point, I cannot remember what George and I were doing, but it was he and 3PO, amongst all the objects like the big spaceship at the beginning and so on. And I was standing next to the model of the Death Star, which was about a metre across, I would imagine. And at some point I moved and I heard this tinkle. And I knew, I was used to bits of my costume falling off, so I kind of knew what they sounded like. But this was something different. And I went back afterwards and found I'd knocked off a sort of, I don't know, kind of tail fin in grey plastic. And I'd put it in my pocket because I didn't want to tell anybody I'd done it. And years later, I showed it to Lorne Peterson, he said, the model maker, and he said, oh, yeah, it was part of an Airfix kit we used, yes. And so it is there with the picture of George and me. I wonder what we were shooting. I can't remember.
Is that you surrounded by all the models?
Yeah, exactly that.
That's after Jedi, then. That would be, yeah.
It was in the genuine archives there. Of course, there are prints of the original Ralph McQuarrie painting that's so... It's the reason I'm here now, talking about it, all these years later. There is a small copy of it, which he signed, and it's framed, and it's cute, and I look at the face to this day and still see the kind of forlorn bereft quality that drew me towards him. And that quality's stayed. And I think partly that's because I was alone on that set. You know, it was not easy to connect with people. And I was alone inside this thing for hours, certainly in the original, by myself. You know, and we have R2-D2 that I had to make up an imaginary relationship with because it never made a sound. One of the stupid joys of the sequels, too many words.
The equals
Was that at the last minute they suddenly decided, why don't we have BB-8 speak to the other actor, speak to 3PO, speak to Daisy Ridley in words. So rather than go beep, 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 why not say, let's go over there? Because, you know, in a conversation it helps to hear what the other person is saying or asking or responding, whatever. So, again, back to that picture, it personifies the state I really was in for most of the time, and maybe that helped me maintain that sort of quality of the character, if I did.
That's an interesting point, though. That again, anybody who's not worn a mask, and I've not worn a mask, can't really conceive that so many of your senses have gone, and you're looking through pinholes basically. And as you've said before, and you say in the book, sometimes you felt a bit more like a part of the set dressing than you did a part of the cast.
100%. It was lovely that in the sequels, you know, Brian Herring was there as a living object of BB-8. Unfortunately, as I've said before, BB-8 was on a much lower eye level, and I kept forgetting that was where I was meant to be looking, rather than Brian's ridiculous performance, which kept me happy, kept me amused.
Hello, I'm Warwick Davis, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Is there anything in there from... And it just drops into my head because we're heading towards Christmas, and I always play this album at Christmas in the Stars. There
is a copy of it. One of the... I think I have it on CD now, but the long-playing record, the LP of Christmas in the Stars... I think I talk about it in the book, going to New York for the day and recording it on Concorde. Amazing. And it is so kitsch that people do. It is like the silly Christmas sweater that you put on Christmas Day. You're allowed to be ridiculous for one day. And that record is part of it. It's not my proudest moment. I think it could have been prepared a little better, but... Hey, one of the emotional memories I've just realised we haven't talked about was the story in the book. And it's interesting that I actually wrote the book, how many years ago?
4, 5?
2 years before COVID.
Yeah.
And I put pictures in the book of pieces of the Millennium Falcon. And the story in the book, which is true, was me finding them at the end of Return of the Jedi, in the back lot at Elstree Studios, just burning it on bonfire, because most of it was plywood, painted grey, but there were all these plastic bits. And bits, I think, from the props department, I think, went and bought a bit of a telephone exchange, if I'm right. So all the wires and... So all this was there, and I didn't understand at the time about... storing you can't store things. Storage costs a lot of money. Yeah. So a lot of things back then were burnt. Now they are triaged and everything is repurposed, whatever. I mean, quite seriously. Because there's a lot of stuff on the set that gets thrown away. A lot of huge blocks of polystyrene, for instance. Yeah. A lot of the sets on the last film were just hand carved out of... brilliantly done, but in kind of nasty material. Yeah. People wearing gas masks, you know, all that. So to find these objects being arbitrarily, to my mind, destroyed, I thought, but I actually liked the Millennium Falcon. I didn't exactly relate to it, but it had been our bus that took us everywhere. Yeah. And I felt it was a bit rude to just kind of dump. So now it's there in the book in various, and of course, as I say, A lot of them were car parts, bits of dashboard or whatever, because why not? It was going to be a dashboard somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the inventiveness of the props crews that can think, well, that's good. If we put it that way up, it'll be even better.
Yes.
Quite often I have enjoyed and sat and read some of the dubbing scripts that I talked about, and I can see, things that say, Kuchana, Karawe Manakutu, Toronto, and I can, and my favourite one, of course, is Imanu Machaveda Con Yumnum. Lightsaber, loved it. Still giggle at that one, yeah. And you see, often in these handwritten things, have horrible writing, but they're quite large letters, big scribble, because I've only just written it or rewritten it, and so I'm watching my performance on screen, but reading here, so peripherally watching me. You sort of get used to doing it. You're allowed to have more than one go, but they really are there with the footage numbers and so on. Well, let's have a look at that. Let me just look. Atoyam na, atoyam no. What to go? I'm rather embarrassed, General Solo, but it appears that you are to be the main course at a banquet in my honour. Love it. Good to Toto. So that was line 838. Wow.
Let's say, because we've already determined that you're the Sinatra of Star Wars. So what happens if you do, I don't know what's in the future, but whatever show or whatever film or whatever, you go and do something and then as things accumulate as they do and companies send you stuff as they do, what do you do then?
I think my wife's going to have to handle that. She can have the benefit. No, it's nice to have souvenirs, and often photographs are good to have because they don't take up space.
Sure.
Bound to happen. And of course, I'd never know where the next phone call, but I can't say no.
If you want to be part of the action, visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch, and check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Until we catch up with you again, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
You're very good. You actually talk and listen or you listen and talk rather than go, next question.